Friends, in our continuing series of conversations with persons who have achieved what they set out to do, who have been success stories in their chosen fields of endeavor, who have been not just persons that executed what they were tasked to do or what they tasked themselves to do, but who thought about what needed to be done and then put in place the building blocks of that exercise and saw it through to its completion. Those are the people that we bring to you because we want you to understand what ticks in the minds of these persons. We know what they've done, we know what they do, but maybe we should get an idea of how they do what they do. And in our conversations so far, we've had people from diverse streams. I think the commonality, as you would have noticed, is that they're all achievers with a capital A. And today, my guest is a former central banker, a career central banker, if I may call him that, because decades of being a part of the Reserve Bank of India, but one who has seen banking through several lenses, not just the lens of a central banker, but as a chairman for 5 years of a large public sector bank, as an advisor now to banks on various matters, technological, regulatory, and several other aspects that I don't want to spell out in detail. Someone who has a good understanding of the role that technology plays in the banking space and would like to push that forward to see that customers like us find banking far more easy and a far better experience. Let me welcome, without further ado, Mr. G. Padmanabhan, former Executive Director of the Reserve Bank of India, and at a personal level, somebody that I have known, that I have admired, that I have respected, and somebody that I'm fond of. Welcome, Mr. Padmanabhan, to the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that gracious introduction.
Okay, let me straight away get into some of the early questions. I know that you are a postgraduate in economics and an MBA. Why did you choose to go into central banking? Was that a career choice of your own? And I'm sure that you and I, you're somewhat younger than I am, but that we had a few choices, even though we didn't have too many when we left school. You had to be an engineer or a doctor. Otherwise, it looked like the rest of the world was closed. And now we discover that these are two of several hundred options available to school students. But once you got into college, you did well, graduated with a good degree, a postgraduate degree. There were several options that opened up. Why did you choose to be a central bank?
Well, Mr. Damodaran, very, very interesting question. I think, first of all, I think probably we have to take a step back and ask me, why did I choose economics at all? Because my father was a professor in chemistry, and I think they considered it blasphemy when after my SSC, where I got reasonably good marks to get into any kind of those days, say group 1 or group 2, I decided to go into the group 3, which was economics and history and things like that. Okay. Somehow or other, I had a fascination for history, economics. So I thought I would do much better rather than following the footsteps of my father, who was a chemistry professor, or my grandfather, who was a mathematics professor, basically in some college. So I completely broke away the tradition at that point of time and then moved into this. Now, the question is, what made me choose central banking as a career? Interesting, but probably something that I don't know whether you would like to hear. One of the disappointments that my father had was that I never even wanted to attempt for the administrative service. Now, it's a different matter whether would I have made it or not, but somehow or other, given the political situation in the state which I grew up, where I saw the best of bureaucrats being, sort of ordered about by the politicians, somehow or other, I decided that that's not a service which is going to be something which I'll be very fond of, or whether I would survive without too much of bruises. I mean, it requires, I think, people of your stature and mental, I think, to go through that kind of an experience. But I was somehow or other apprehensive. And I stayed in a colony where I was probably surrounded by 2-3 officers who were working in the Reserve Bank of India. And the Reserve Bank of India was just about a stone's throw distance from where I resided. And that the what we call the Belhaven in Trivandrum, which was a earlier palace. And that was actually the playground for all of us when we grew up. And then later it was purchased by the Reserve Bank of India. So these guys going with those cute looking bags, going out for inspection, this was a fascination for me. I mean, said, okay, now probably this is one institution which I look up with awe and which I should try and get into. And luckily that succeeded. I mean, I get into the institution initially in the clerical cadre, but I think within less than 2 years, I directly wrote the grade B examination and I got a good rank, and then I directly joined as grade B director too. So that was the background, but I think that's it. I don't think that I had anything beyond that as at that age as to why I should be joining a central bank. But these two things I was very clear. One, what I didn't want to do, and the other one was what I said, I am fascinated about, let me give it a try.
Interesting you say this, because, when I qualified for the civil services and I had to choose, we had to answer 2 questions. One, would you like to be considered for your home state? Second, if not, what are the choices that you would like to have? And I don't think we even had choices. It was only consider the home state or no. That was the only thing on which I consulted my father. My father was in the judiciary, not in Kerala. He was in Chennai. And he gave me very practical advice. He said, you have a maternal uncle who is a very strong member of the Communist Party. You have a paternal uncle who is very strongly aligned with the Congress. So you better write no in capital letters for whether you want to be considered for your home state, because whoever is in power, you will get it. So you might as well go somewhere else. And I think his reading of the situation was very good. Luckily for me, I chose not to get into that. But in some sense, it's interesting where you had your playground, that also became your institution, from Khel Bhumi to Karma Bhumi in a sense, right?
Exactly.
This is very interesting.
No, Mr. Damodaran, if I may say one, see, probably I was a rank holder in my BA Economics and MA Economics, second rank, and I topped the university. Probably, I think you will find, I don't know how many examples you find where a rank holder in economics history not even wanting to go into a particular service, which was at that point of time, I think the most coveted one. I mean, during our times, there were very few jobs that was most coveted, but somehow or other, I did not want to do that, and I stood by my decision.
I think you chose very well. I had the privilege once, interestingly, in Reserve Bank of India's Delhi office, where I was for a period of 11 months during Bimal Jalan's tenure. He asked me to look after the restructuring of 3 weak public sector banks and located me in that office. And President Kalam, he later became president, but then he was a member of the Central Board of RBI. He had come there, and Yashwant Thorat told me, why don't you introduce him? No, I didn't know too much about him, so I read up something. And one of the things that I said then, and Kalam held me by the hand, and he asked me in Tamil, why are you sharing all these things with them? Because he had applied for the Indian Air Force and didn't qualify. I said the Air Force took a great decision, because otherwise they would have denied us a great scientist and a great political leader. So perhaps not opting to go into the IAS gave us a good central bank. I think in everything one needs to see something positive. But having got into the central bank, Did it ever occur to you during all those decades that maybe you need to look at something else? I know some people get into central bank and go into consultancy, go into academics, go abroad to the fund or the bank. But I know you've done some work for outside of India, but did it ever occur to you, okay, I've seen this, now let me do something else?
Uh, Really, I mean, no, because I think my career has been quite interesting. In fact, if you compare it with my batchmates, uh, I have probably seen more areas and verticals within the central bank than many of my other peers. I mean, started in the accounts, then I went into the supervision of the banks, and when I that was in Chennai and Trivandrum, and when I got transferred to Mumbai, it was a foregone conclusion that I'm going to be continued in supervision. But at that point of time, the powers be decided that I need to go into the foreign exchange and then the markets. Then I moved out when I was promoted again to the debt market. And then again, when I was settling down, I was asked to go to Hyderabad as the regional director, took over the office, and then it was the time when we had to put the Global Trust Bank under a moratorium, and I had to run the entire process. And then out of the blue, I was called when I was sitting in the midst of an interviewing some new candidates hoping to join Reserve Bank of India to come to the central office and take over technology. And that was complete new area, then payments. Then finally, when I was promoted as executive director, most of this area started reporting. So in a way, my work was so interesting, so varied within the central bank that I was really not looking out for something else, except once. During my tenure as CGM, Chief General Manager of Payment System, that was the time when this NPCI was coming up. And then I had actually applied for the post of CEO there. And then I was sort of deciding whether I need to quit and go, because at that point of time, what could be our career was not very certain. Whether I would become an executive director at all was not very certain. So I was sort of contemplating what to do. Then probably there was a divine intervention. They decided on the date of the interview, and of that exact date, I was supposed to be in Shabarimala. And then I asked for a change of date, which they refused. Then I said, "What? That's a divine intervention. Stay with what you are." And I continued. So that's how my career proceeded as far as the Reserve Bank is concerned.
Let me get to a somewhat tough area. There's a lot of conversation on this. Some of it, as in the case of most subjects, is uninformed conversation. But even veteran bankers have talked about it, written about it. Has the RBI been a little slow when it comes to dealing with bank failures, with impending bank failures? Because we've seen quite a lot happening in the private sector. Everybody thought the private sector was the panacea. Luckily for me, I am vindicated. I have never believed that. But now with so many failures, even recently retired bank chairman wrote a book. He believes that the RBI was a little slow in dealing with the problems of Yes Bank, and we've had several others before that. Is there a case for saying that bank supervision should be taken out of the central bank, parked elsewhere? Where, for example, the Narasimham committee had said you have a BFS and the only commonality should be the governor between the RBI and the BFS, and then you carve out the BFS. What is your thoughts on this? I hear a lot of noise. To quote Virat Kohli, there's a lot of outside noise. So let's get an informed perspective.
Slightly difficult question, but let me try to articulate this in the way. Now, I think to start from the last point which you said, are we going to solve this problem, or would we have been better off if supervision had been segregated, taken out of Reserve Bank of India? Then I think things would have happened probably the way we wish it would have happened. I don't think that's entirely going to be true. So because it is ultimately going to be a question of the kind of outlook, the culture, the pressures, the overall situation that one needs to take on board. And then there are several actors that we have to bring together to be able to put a bang under the moratorium and then take the decision. So often it happens that there are different compulsions that come in place, but the question is whether Reserve Bank of India should have acted earlier. So I think in retrospect, I think all of us with the 2020 vision can say that something could have been done better. And if I look back, I also think that there are some of things that which I could have done better. But these are people who have to take decisions at that particular point of time. Now the question is that whether some of the issues could have been handled differently in terms of the regulatory actions that preceded let's say Yes Bank or something else. Probably many of us, even who are career central bankers, would say that maybe yes, there are certain things which we could have done better, we could have been tougher about it. But I think there has to be a balance, because today we are probably going to the other extreme where we are taking very, very stringent actions, which probably now banks have started talking about the operational freedom and issues where there are too many interventions happening. So what I'm trying to put across is this is a difficult balancing game, and an institutional framework, whether it is part of a central bank or a different, is not going to solve the problem. It's all a question of, let's say, a culture. It varies from country to country, the professional approach, and ultimately the people who are there, how best they are able to get a full picture of the whole scenario. I mean, this is where I should say that some of the governance issues that you have been articulating off and on, absolute peaches. I think the kind of the depth and the understanding that you have put across in some of your observations and articles, I think that those kinds of angles of depth, very few people can go into and think about. So it concerns personalities also. I stop. I think beyond this, it becomes a little bit too controversial.
Earlier, there used to be a system where at middle level, central bankers were sent for a couple of years to commercial banks and come back. But my understanding is that was given up some time ago, for whatever reason.
It was a bit of a fiasco in the sense that ultimately, I don't think the banks are going to give you the positions which are very critical for you to understand the complete nuances of it. Yeah. So it all depended upon the individuals who wanted to and how enterprising they are in trying to go there and get the kind of seats they wanted where they wanted to understand. It helped up to a particular point of time. But again, Mr. Damodaran, I think being practical, according to me, is again a bit of a culture. While education can add to that, I don't think education alone can make you a complete person. So it depends upon how best you are able to think through, look at the practical side. Am I thinking about a suggestion which is practically impossible to implement? I think these are the issues which become critical. And these are exactly some of the issues which you have also articulated. Maybe time permitting, we could get into some of these issues, but I think the practicality of a regulatory direction also becomes very critical when we are thinking about all these issues.
I think that is very well put, that education by itself is not going to provide the entire range of what you need. Moving a little bit, you chaired a PSU Bank Board for 5 years. And let me share this with you. I know that along with you, 6 or 7 other persons are appointed as non-executive chairpersons of other banks. And at that time, I had written saying that, unless this is thought through well, there could be a problem. You're sending very experienced people there. But what is the role as non-executives? And in what way will the serving bank persons be able to exploit that benefit And I thought perhaps that for persons like that, the legitimate role would have been mentoring of identified, future leaders in the organization, etc. But what has been your experience over 5 years at the Bank of India? Large bank, it was number two when banks were nationalized, but after that did have several hiccups along the way.
Sort of mix, good and bad. Good things first. I think I was lucky to have a board which by public sector standards was very good. And I had a very cohesive board. And I allowed actually the free discussion to happen. It was not a sort of a somebody saying something and getting accepted. So I allowed people to dissent on a particular issue. It was particularly good. It was good. The board functioning was good. We did try to, sort of mentor people. In fact, we had an HR expert, which many public sector banks does not have or had not had at any point of time. But we had an HR expert, an HR guy who had come in from the private sector. So he was a truly brilliant guy to be on the board. We did try to bring in some kind of this succession planning and then mentoring to make sure that we are able to improve the quality of the people. There were 2-3 things, having said that, where we had a problem. See, look, in public sector banks, I would say that in retrospect, since we started this conversation one way, one of the monumental errors we did was to stop recruitment for some point of time. So when we stopped this recruitment, now we have a vacuum, right? The senior guys who are there going, the junior guys are the people who are too junior, and their ability to take on a large bank and then work through this became a big issue. So then within those constraints, we were trying to find people but having said that, the issue is that I was faced with a couple of situations which I found very difficult to accept. One was that the MD gets taken out and taken to another bank without even the chairman knowing about it. I mean, I came to know from the TV flash that my MD is being moved. So, which means that we go back to the question which you started with: what is the role of the non-executive chairman? Is it well defined? Now, is he given certain responsibilities? And is anybody who is calling him over and discussing with them periodically about what he thinks about the bank? I didn't think any of this was, at least except some couple of special meetings, I don't think I ever had any interaction with the government. That's number one. Reserve Bank, as and when the reports were getting discussed, I might have gone to Reserve Bank because of my background, but I don't think formally we were getting called for discussions beyond this couple of times when once a year, at least when the report is being, inspection report is being discussed, nothing beyond that. So the issue is, I think when we are thinking about something, and if you recall, Nayak committee thought about this as the last stage of reforms. We cannot have a situation where 4 of the 5 don't get implemented, and non-executive chairman gets implemented, and what is his role, responsibility, nobody is clear about. But I am even more worried about this. I think within all these constraints, most of us tried to bring in some changes in the organization, but at the end of the 5-year period, we were simply asked to go. And now I think most of these banks don't have even a non-executive chairman. So have we given up this concept basically? So I think we need to think through these aspects fully, which is not happening. And even in respect of some of the board positions and all, where we know right from day one, the vacancies are arising, something which has happened for which I think we should thank the government, is that I think now most of the MD posts are getting filled up in time. Earlier, it was not even getting filled up in time. So that's one thing. But the board positions continue to languish. There are many boards which do not have in the public sector bank. So when we talk about the governance, Mr. Damodaran, I think we need to, at least the banking system, we need to segregate between the problems of the public sector banks and the problems that is being faced by the private banks. It's not that the private banks don't have issues, because I think somebody asked the question, are independent directors truly independent in India? I think I'll put that question back to you for consideration, because I think if you are not in the comfort zone of the people who are there, particularly the MD, I don't think even in the private sector, somebody, irrespective of his ability and competence, gets picked up as an independent director.
It's interesting you say this. I'm reminded of what Dr. Reddy said when he was asked, is the RBI autonomous? And he said it is as autonomous as the government allows it to be. So playing on that same theme, I think every independent director is as autonomous, as independent as he or she wants to be.
Exactly.
And it's not something that's given to you by the system. You're either independent or you're not. That has been my belief. I wanted to touch on what you see as a future banking scenario. Now, there's a lot of feeling, and you are also associated, I know, with fintechs, etc., as advisor. So there are some people saying with the fintechs coming, banks won't have any place. I remember many years ago reading an article saying from branchless banking, we will move to bankless banking. So now fintechs have come. Whether they are going to create that, I saw a former private sector chief executive of a bank saying, no, both these will coexist, each have their places. How do you see this scenario? What is the future of banking sector or the financial sector?
The technology will come in a big way. I don't think there is any doubt about it. But I think to answer your question, probably I need to make a distinction between what we call a digital bank and what is a fintech.
Yes.
Because both are in the financial sector, both are driven by technology, but the difference between a digital bank and a fintech is the main source of funding as far as a digital bank continues to be deposits, which is not the case with fintech. So whether the fintech in this country will be allowed, or the people of this country will be comfortable, or the regulators will be comfortable in fintechs having deposits of the people and running the intermediation process, I think we are far away from that. But however, the way in which the banks function, the way in which the customer experience happens, the onboarding happens, the KYC happens, with the distributed ledger technology coming in, there is going to be a huge shakeout as far as the traditional banking methods or branch models are concerned. So that is going to undergo a major change. And we also have the concept of what is called technically as a neo-bank, where, for instance, in Europe, they are allowed by law to access all the bank systems, whereas in India, today, although there are no rules and regulations, what these people do is to sit on the top. They sit on the top of the banking layer and then try to aggregate and intermediate in such a way that they play a role. But I think ultimately the deposits, the risks, and the customers remain with the banks for some time to come. Yes, the banks are facing tremendous competition to make sure that they do a better job of this. And probably this is where I would take the example of State Bank of India. The biggest digital bank is being run by the biggest state bank bank in the country, which is the YONO application. So if public sector bank like State Bank can bring in YONO and completely change the way in which the banking is done, it is not that the public sector banks cannot achieve, or the banking system as a whole cannot achieve. But there also, between the public sector and the private sector, there is a difference. And I'm a person who believes that as far as technology implementation is concerned, the PWD contract rules cannot apply to the banking system. We need to have a different set of rules and regulations. Otherwise, these people, because of the sheer process overheads, will remain as laggards.
No, I think that was very well put when you said the PWD approach. Recently, you might have read of a road in Bijnor, UP, where at the time of inauguration, the local politician broke a coconut on the road and the road cracked. The coconut remained intact. That was a few days ago. And I have argued separately in a group that this establishes the need for rituals. It certainly even rituals help sometimes, at least to show the quality of the road, if nothing else, because the coconut showed how bad the road was. Moving to another area, which is
So, Mr. Damar,
yes,
if I
sorry,
can,
yes,
I can just to clinch
yes.
the point, one more issue I want to say is I think it's very important that you brought up that issue of coconut on the road. But the problem with the technology in an interconnected world is that one bad actor can ruin the entire system. So you need to ensure that it is quality across end to end.
That is very well put. Another area with which you are certainly more familiar than most other people is this ongoing debate about cryptos. It should not be currency. Should it be an asset? If so, who should regulate a crypto asset? Where should it be SEBI that regulates the crypto asset? A lot of conversation. I understand legislation is around the corner. Uh, Clearly, I think one of the good things, according to me, is to say that we will ban cryptos is not the solution. Banning never ever helped anybody. But we ought to find a way in which it becomes a legitimate and a bona fide player within the system. Clearly cannot be as a currency, cannot be, if you look at the four functions of currency, it cannot be a medium of exchange or even, a standard of measurement. Maybe it can be a store as an asset, nothing more than that. Where do you see that heading?
Well, I think this is one area or one of the examples where you can say, again, going back to the conversation that you started with, whether the regulators are too slow. I think that was the question that we started our conversation with.
Yes.
I strongly feel that crypto has been allowed sort of an approach, a laissez-faire kind of thing, where probably we have reached a stage, whether it's good or bad, we will say that I think too many people are in it. You just cannot disrupt something which you allowed to grow beyond a point, and then you say you don't like it. Now you have to take a call whether you like it or not upfront, particularly in a technology-led innovation, because the scaling up happens very, very quickly as far as this part is concerned. Now, the worry that the regulators have about crypto is that the Bitcoin, for example, which started the whole thing, it appeared following the global financial crisis. So basically, it was used initially for people to put the money as a safe haven, money laundering, criminals, kind of, etc. But today, if you raise the same specter and start conversation in an audience where the crypto investors are there, and I faced this in one of the global fintech festival when this was saying, they say that you say that the Bitcoin is responsible for money laundering. He said we have statistics to prove that the biggest money laundering happens through US dollars. It is not Bitcoin. So that's a counter that these people have as far as this concerned. Now, what is the worry of the regulator? The worry of the regulator is that any financial asset must have a value from certain underlying flows. Now, there is nothing. This is an item. Nobody has seen it, heard it. It is supposed to be a code. And for the code, people are quoting a price, and that price is getting traded here and there. But the people see a value in this. People are prepared to speculate on that or buy and sell that. Now, what would be the role of the regulator? I would think that today, if you take the realistic situation, it is too late to ban. It is not going to work, and it's too interconnected. If you ban, the money can go out through the LRS route and other kind of foreign exchange routes, and they could get done elsewhere. It could go into it's like even during the worst current account times, and you were a part of the government at that point of time, I think we did debate as to whether we had to bring in the gold control, and the decision was no, because it pushes more gold into smuggling and things like that. So that's the exact situation that we have got into. So it has to be regulated. Now the question is, is regulation easy? It is not going to be easy. Now, how granular are you going to get as far as this regulation is concerned? So if you look at most of the other countries, what the regulators have done is that many of them have sort of firewalled the financial system to make sure that their credit is not used for speculating in this. It is your money that you are using, and you are being warned adequately about what are the downsides of this on a very regular basis. Now, that's the approach that most of the regulators have done. And today, in terms of numbers and the volume when compared to the overall, people even argue that some of these volumes are overpitched, but even taking these volumes, I think is a minuscule of the total system that we are looking at. So I think from a destabilization angle, we need not worry too much. But I think this is something, I mean, you started off with the 4 functions, that famous Crowther definition: money is a matter of functions.
Functions 4.
Measure, a standard, a store.
And a store.
It could be nothing, but still people want it. People want to trade in it, and so be it. So you will have to alert people to the risk and allow this to happen in a more regulated way. There is huge amount of tax possibility, tax revenues to the system, which is there. So this needs to be looked at with an open mind. This is where I sometimes wonder, and probably a controversial thought, whether this should be done by one of the existing regulators, or you need a new regulator for this to think differently, because it's a new asset altogether.
No, that's an interesting thought. Bring in a few people, younger people. In fact, the boardrooms of the future, I am told, will have people wearing T-shirts and shorts coming into the boardrooms, because that would be contemporary knowledge factored into regulation. I wish we could have continued this conversation, but it's been fascinating hearing you on this. I know you are a tennis player, and I think in the course of the last few minutes, you have managed several good overheads, several cross courts, several drop shots, several lobs, and several down the line winners. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Padmanabhan.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.